in the quiet town of Eldridge Hollow, where the trees stood tall and shadows danced in the fading light. A sinister presence lurked beneath the surface. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of a man named Victor Hale, an unassuming figure with a chilling reputation that sent shivers down their spines. Victor was an introverted artist who lived in a decaying house at the end of a winding road. His paintings were hauntingly beautiful, depicting dark landscapes and twisted figures that seemed to draw the viewer into a nightmare. But it was not his art that made him infamous. It was the way he preyed upon the vulnerable, using psychological terror as his weapon of choice. Victor would study his victims meticulously, choosing those who carried burdens of their own, loss, fear, or insecurity. He would approach them slowly, under the guise of friendship, offering a listening ear and a comforting presence. But as the bond grew, so did the darkness he harbored. He would plant seeds of doubt and fear, manipulating their thoughts until they were ensnared in his web. One such victim was a young woman named Sarah. She had recently lost her mother and was struggling to find her footing in the world. Victor approached her at a local coffee shop, weaving tales of his own grief and loss. Sarah, seeking solace, found herself drawn to him, unaware of the storm brewing beneath Victor's calm exterior. As their friendship deepened, Victor began to introduce subtle horrors into Sarah's life. He would leave cryptic notes at her door, each one more unsettling than the last. "I see you," one would read, while others hinted at her worst fears. He reveled in watching her confusion and despair, feeding off her growing paranoia. Late at night, when shadows crept into her room, Sarah would hear whispers that seemed to echo from the walls. "You're all alone," they would taunt, sending her heart racing. She felt as though Victor was always watching, lurking just outside her line of sight, ready to pounce when she was at her most vulnerable. In her desperation, Sarah confided in her friends, but Victor had already woven his web tightly around her mind. "They don't understand you," he would whisper, sowing discord between Sarah and those who cared for her. Soon she found herself isolated, trapped in a world where the only constant was Victor's eerie presence. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's mental state deteriorated. Victor's influence engulfed her, leading her to question her sanity. She began to see figures in the periphery, shadows that danced just out of reach, and hear voices that echoed her worst fears. Victor had become her tormentor, the architect of her psychological ruin. One fateful evening, consumed by fear and confusion, Sarah confronted Victor, demanding to know what he wanted from her. He merely smiled, his eyes glinting with a malevolent light. "I want you to see the truth," he replied softly. "You're not strong enough to face it, but I can help you." With that, he led her into his darkened studio, where canvases dripped with despair and agony. As she stepped inside, the air thickened with dread. Sarah gasped as she recognized the twisted figures on the canvases, distorted versions of herself, trapped in a nightmare of her own making. "You see, Sarah," Victor whispered, stepping closer. This is your reality now. You belong to the darkness. Embrace it. Panic surged within her as she realized that she was not merely a victim. She was a pawn in Victor's game, a living canvas for his malevolence. In that moment of clarity, a flicker of defiance ignited within her, drawing on every ounce of strength. Sarah broke free from Victor's grasp and fled into the night, the shadows of Eldridge Hollow closing in around her. She ran through the winding streets, her heart pounding, desperate to escape the psychological terror that had consumed her. But Victor was relentless. He followed her, whispering her deepest fears into the night, haunting her every step. You can't escape, he taunted, his voice echoing in her mind. I own you now. In her frantic flight, Sarah stumbled upon the edge of a cliff, the moonlight casting an ethereal glow on the precipice. With nowhere left to run, she faced Victor, who approached with a predatory smile. You've come to the end of your journey, my dear, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. But in that moment, Sarah remembered the love of her mother, the strength she had within. Summoning all her courage, she turned to face Victor, her eyes blazing with defiance. You don't own me, she declared, her voice steady. I am not your creation.